My name is Margaret Walker. I am 83 years old. And I need you to hear this. Last winter, my stepson, Jared, slammed me against the pantry door so hard my hearing aid popped out and skidded across the linoleum. I remember scrambling for it with trembling fingers, the room spinning, my ribs aching from where his elbow had pressed. He didn't even glance back. He only said, "If you tell anyone, you'll end up in a home. You like your freedom, don't you, Grandma?" That night, I slept in my armchair with the front door quietly unlocked, just in case I finally found the courage to run. But where would I go? Who would believe an old woman accusing her respected stepson of violence? Especially when I'd hidden it for so long. You might be wondering how I ended up there, in a house I paid for, a house where I wasn't even safe. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because once upon a time, I believed in love. I believed in second chances. I believed that opening my heart again after my first husband passed would give me peace. Instead, I walked into a slow-burning nightmare wearing pearls and hope. I met Charles Walker when I was 61. A retired banker with a warm voice and gentle hands. He'd lost his wife to cancer a few years earlier, and I'd been widowed for nearly a decade. Our courtship was soft, quiet. Long walks, late-night chess games, a shared love for blueberry muffins. And when he proposed in front of the church one Sunday morning, I said yes without hesitation. But Jared, his only son, didn't clap. He didn't smile. In fact, he didn't even attend the small backyard wedding. That should have been the first sign. But love makes excuses. And I was tired of being alone. First, things were manageable. Jared lived 2 towns over and visited once in a while. He was cold, yes, but never cruel. Not yet. Charles died suddenly 5 years into our marriage. A heart attack, the doctor said. Just like that, I was widowed again. Only this time, the house was full of shadows. And Jared moved in. "I just want to help you, Margaret," he said that first day, already unpacking his bags. "You shouldn't be alone in your age." I nodded, grateful at the time. Foolish. The first time he yelled, it was because I left the kitchen light on. He said electricity wasn't free and slapped my hand like a child. I laughed nervously. "It's just a light, Jared." His eyes narrowed. "And it's my house now. My rules." That night, I slept with the bedroom door locked. And that became a habit. The next few months blurred. He controlled what groceries I could buy. He took away my car keys. He changed my phone password and told the neighbors I was starting to lose it. I wasn't. But his lies were seeds, and they grew. Sometimes I thought about telling someone. My friend Edith from church, maybe. Or the pharmacist who always called me Sunshine. But shame is a heavy thing, especially when you've kept quiet for so long. What would I say? That my grown stepson called me names when no one was around. That he threw my painkillers away and replaced them with sugar pills. That he told the doctor I was getting paranoid. Would anyone have believed me? Once, I tried to tell his girlfriend, Mara. She was a sweet girl, maybe 25, far too young for him. One day, she caught me flinching when Jared raised his voice. I whispered, "Please don't leave me alone with him." Her face paled and she nodded. But she never came back. And Jared knew. "Trying to ruin my life now." He spat, pressing my wrist into the table. "You think anyone's going to believe a lonely old woman?" After that, he took my church clothes. Said I didn't need them. "You're too frail to go out," he said with mock concern. But I think he just didn't want me around people who loved me. I became a ghost in my own home. Cooked, I cleaned, I shrank. Until one evening, just a few weeks ago, everything changed. It was a Wednesday. Cold, damp, with a chill in the air that made my joints stiff. Jared was late coming home from wherever he went these days. I was sitting in the kitchen, reading the same paragraph in my Bible for the 4th time when I heard a noise at the front door. Not the lock, not a key, just a noise. And then a whisper. "Mrs. Walker, are you okay?" Froze. No one called me that anymore. Not even Jared. I shuffled to the door and looked through the peephole. 'Twas Mara. She held a folder in one hand and her phone in the other. I have something to show you, she said, voice shaking. That was the moment I realized. She knew. But just as I reached for the door, I heard Jared's car pull up. And everything inside me screamed, run. I didn't open the door. Couldn't. My hand hovered over the knob, shaking like a leaf caught in a storm. Mara was still there, whispering my name. Mrs. Walker? Please. But the sound of Jared's tires crunching up the gravel driveway paralyzed me. I backed away, slowly, quietly, praying she'd take the hint and disappear before he saw her. My heart thundered so loud I feared he'd hear it through the walls. Then I heard the sharp click of her heels as she darted away into the night. I barely made it back to my seat before Jared stepped through the front door. He smelled like whiskey and cold air. You just sitting here like a lump, he sneered, tossing his coat on the floor. Didn't I tell you to vacuum today? I nodded quickly. Yes, Jared. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowed. Then why's there dust on the stairs? He didn't wait for an answer. He slapped the Bible out of my lap. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, and the pages scattered like frightened birds. You think that's gonna save you? He muttered, stomping past me and heading into the kitchen. You better start praying harder. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't let me. I kept thinking of Mara, of what she might have brought in that folder. What did she know? What had she seen? But more importantly, why had she come back? The next morning I made Jared breakfast. I always did. 2 eggs, toast, sausage, coffee, black. I moved around the kitchen like a ghost, careful not to make any sound that might upset him. I wore my silence like armor. He didn't say thank you. He never did. But as he chewed, I finally found the nerve to ask, How's Mara? He looked up sharply. What? Kept my voice light. I was just wondering. Haven't seen her around. He smirked. She's gone. Couldn't handle being with a real man. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. I couldn't risk it. Still, I filed away his answer. If she'd left him, maybe that meant she was free to help. If she was trying to help. Later that week I saw her again. I was walking to the mailbox, a rare freedom he allowed when he was out. And there she was, parked across the street in an old blue sedan. She didn't wave. She didn't honk. She just looked at me, her eyes glassy, and lifted the folder ever so slightly. I didn't go to her, but I nodded, just once, and she drove away. Back inside, I waited for Jared to return. I needed to keep up the act, keep things normal. The more I blended in, the more he let his guard down. But inside something had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning. The next day, I snuck into the hall closet and retrieved an old flip phone I'd hidden years ago, back when I still believed in emergency plans. I plugged it in behind the laundry machine and waited for it to charge. By evening I had 1 bar of battery. Just enough to send a message. I typed, "Saw you. I'm ready," and hit send. Mara replied 10 minutes later. "Meet me Thursday. Library parking lot. Noon." I had 4 days to prepare. I started keeping a small bag under the sink. Nothing much. Just my medication, some cash I'd stashed in a vitamin bottle, and my late husband's will. I still wasn't sure if I had the strength to go through with it. Jared had spent years grinding me down to dust, turning me into someone who barely looked up when spoken to. But I knew one thing. I didn't want to die in that house. On Thursday morning I told Jared I felt sick. "Might have the flu," I said, faking a cough. He grimaced and muttered something about going to the bar to avoid catching it. As soon as he left, I grabbed the bag and left out the back. It was raining lightly, and I didn't have an umbrella. But I didn't care. Each step down that driveway felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I reached the street, Mara's car was already waiting. I got in without a word. She handed me a thermos of hot tea and the folder. Inside were photos, audio recordings, bank statements, medical records, her notes, my bruises, my voice on her voicemail, trembling and whispering, "He's hurting me. Please don't tell him." She had proof. and she had a plan. "We go to the police today," she said. "But first I need you to tell them everything. No more silence. No more protecting him." I gripped the folder with both hands. For a long time I just stared at the dashboard, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. "Okay," I said. We drove to the station. I gave my statement. The officers were kind. They took photos of my injuries. They asked questions. They made copies of the will. I told them about the stolen money, the fake pills, the threats. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And then they asked the question I wasn't ready for. "Where do you want to stay tonight?" Froze. I hadn't thought that far. The idea of going back to that house made my stomach twist, but I didn't have anyone else. My family was gone. My friends had faded over the years. And Mara, sweet as she was, couldn't risk taking me in. Jared still had people watching. An officer suggested a shelter. Quiet place outside town. Clean. Discreet. He nodded. "Yes, please." That night, I slept in a twin bed with a real lock on the door and no Jared to fear. For the first time in years, I dreamt of my husband Charles. He was smiling. Peaceful. But peace doesn't last. The next morning the police called. Jared was gone. He hadn't been home when they went to arrest him. And now his car was missing. They'd put out a warrant. Issued alerts. But they warned me. "He may come looking for you." And suddenly I was no longer free. I was a fugitive in hiding. The shelter moved me to a different location that same afternoon. 2 counties over. Into a dim old building with creaky floors and a crooked front porch. They said it was safer there. "Off the radar," the director told me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We've dealt with worse men than him, Margaret." I wanted to believe her. But I knew Jared. He wasn't just cruel. He was calculating, vengeful. And the moment he realized I'd spoken, I knew he wouldn't stop until he found me. The new shelter gave me a small room with a narrow bed and a locked dresser. There were 3 other women on the floor, all younger, all bruised in different ways. One was missing a front tooth. Another jumped every time the phone rang. We were all strangers, yet tied together by the same quiet, aching thread. Survival. I kept the folder Mara gave me tucked under my pillow. Like a shield. Mara visited once every 2 days, bringing updates, sandwiches, and news. "He still hasn't used his bank card," she said. But police found his car near the train station. That meant he was either out of town or getting closer on foot. I didn't tell her about the phone call I received that morning. Because somehow Jared had gotten my new number. The phone rang at 5:12 a.m. I jolted up, heart pounding, staring at the screen. No caller ID. I answered, hand trembling. There was silence at first. Then breathing. And then his voice. "You thought you could run. You old witch." I dropped the phone. The director reported it immediately. They changed my number and notified law enforcement. "He's bluffing," she said. "Trying to scare you." But Jared didn't bluff. He acted. And fast. Later that night, the shelter received a suspicious delivery. No return address. A brown envelope sealed with black tape. Inside, a single Polaroid of me sitting on the porch 3 days ago. Taken from across the street. He knew where I was. The police relocated me again. This time to a safe house run by a retired couple who'd spent years fostering abuse survivors. They didn't ask many questions. They didn't pry. They just gave me warm soup, clean sheets, and silence. But I could feel the walls closing in again. The fear crept into my bones like winter frost. Why hadn't they caught him yet? 2 weeks passed. The investigation slowed. The detectives stopped calling. Mara said they were doing their best. But I could see the worry in her eyes. Jared was smart. And he'd had a head start. Still I tried to rebuild. One slow breath at a time. I started walking in the garden every morning. Just 10 minutes at first. Then 20. My knees ached, but my lungs began to feel lighter. I spoke with the other safe house guests. One woman named Clara reminded me of my old neighbor. She'd escaped her husband after 23 years of torment. Sometimes, she told me one night over tea, we survive the storm but carry the flood inside us. That line stayed with me. One morning, while unpacking my few clothes, I found a letter in my coat pocket, folded twice. No envelope, no signature. Just a torn scrap of lined paper with handwriting I recognized instantly. Don't think I won't finish what I started. You'll never be free. I dropped it like it burned me. How did he get that close? How did he slip a letter into my pocket without anyone noticing? The safe house reviewed security footage. Nothing. The director suspected it may have been slipped in days earlier. Or Jared had found someone to help him. Sometimes they pay teenagers, she warned. They don't even tell them what they're delivering. Mara was furious. This is harassment. You're supposed to be protected. But I was tired of waiting for someone to protect me. I wanted to fight back. So I asked Mara for a favor. I need a lawyer, I said. Her eyes widened. Are you sure? I want a restraining order. Formal case. I want the world to know exactly what he's done. And I want every piece of property I own returned. Car. The savings. The house. Everything. She smiled through tears. Now that's the Mrs. Walker I knew was in there. We met the lawyer a week later. A young woman named Grace. Fierce. Dark. The kind of person who didn't blink at danger. Grace went through every document with me. Charles's will, the forged bank withdrawals, the medical records. You have enough to bury him legally, she said. But it'll take time. I didn't mind waiting anymore. Because for the first time in years I wasn't alone. 2 months later we got a court date. A civil suit for property theft, medical abuse, and elder harassment. I'd have to testify. Face him. If they could find him. Mara held my hand as we walked out of Grace's office. The sky was gray but my heart felt lighter. Until I saw the note on the windshield. Scrawled in red marker. See you in court, witch. I staggered back, my knees buckling. He had followed us. Again. Mara shouted for help. Grace ran to call the police. And me. I stood there, the wind whipping my coat, knowing exactly what would happen next. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was going to show up. And this time, he might not come alone. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just from the air conditioning, but from the way every stranger in that room looked at me like I didn't belong. An 83-year-old woman in a navy cardigan and orthopedic shoes, clutching a folder tighter than she held her own breath. I wasn't weak anymore, but I still felt small. Jared sat at the defendant's table like he was attending a birthday party, murking, leaning back with one arm draped over the chair, his fingers tapping to some rhythm only he heard. He looked different, leaner, grayer, but not remorseful, not even nervous. And when his eyes met mine, he winked. The judge hadn't entered yet, so technically, nothing had begun. But to me, this was already war. Are you okay? Mara whispered beside me. She'd worn her Sunday best, like she was ready to fight for me with words alone. Grace, my lawyer, had her laptop open, documents highlighted, evidence folders stacked like armor. I nodded once. Let's finish this. The trial was set for 2 days. Day 1 was about the abuse. Grace laid everything bare. Hospital records, digital photos of bruises, pharmacy logs showing swapped medications. She played audio clips Mara had secretly recorded, clips of Jared yelling, threatening, mocking. When my voice filled the courtroom speakers. Please don't hurt me. Jared, please. There was a long, haunting silence. Even the bailiff looked away. Jared's lawyer tried to object. Emotional manipulation, he called it. But the judge allowed it. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand with the slow determination of someone who had died and come back to life. I told them everything. From the first slap on the wrist, to the last shove against the pantry door. I spoke of isolation, humiliation, financial control, and the weight of silence that nearly crushed me. My late husband trusted him, I said, voice trembling. And I loved his father too much to believe his son could be so cruel. But I was wrong. And I paid for that mistake with every bruise, every sleepless night, every time I pretended I had the flu just to be left alone. At one point I looked directly at Jared. "You didn't break me. You tried. But you didn't." He laughed. Loud. In court. The judge slammed the gavel. "One more outburst, Mr. Walker, and you'll be removed." That laugh stayed in my ears the whole night. Back at the safe house, I barely touched my dinner. The other women, Clara included, sat with me in silence, giving space. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. Survivors spoke in glances. Day 2 was about the property. Grace proved Jared had forged documents to transfer money. He'd impersonated me on calls, used my social security checks, sold my old car and never told me, changed the will illegally. The house. It was never his to begin with. "He used her silence," Grace said, pointing at me, "as a weapon." Jared looked less smug by then. His foot tapped faster. His lawyer whispered urgently. But the evidence was too solid. The final witness was Mara. She testified for nearly an hour. About her own emotional abuse from Jared. About the time she saw bruises on my back. About how she followed him once and saw him toss my prescription pills into a dumpster. She finished with tears in her voice. She begged me not to leave her alone with him. And I did. I still regret that. But I'm here now. After closing arguments, the judge called a recess. We had to wait 3 hours for the verdict. Felt like a lifetime. When the judge returned, the room held its breath. "Based on the evidence presented," she began, "this court finds Mr. Jared Walker guilty of financial exploitation, elder abuse, and emotional harm with intent." My knees buckled. But this time, from relief. "I hereby grant full restoration of Margaret Walker's property, assets, and legal rights. Mr. Walker is to remain in custody pending sentencing." The courtroom exploded. Reporters, whispers, flashing cameras. And Jared. He lunged. In one terrifying second, he was out of his seat, screaming my name, calling me a liar, a thief, a conniving old hag. The bailiffs tackled him before he got close, but not before I saw the true monster he'd always been. Not just cruel. Unhinged. They dragged him out kicking. I stood still. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't blink. I had to see him gone with my own eyes. The judge banged her gavel again. Order in the court. But I didn't hear it. All I could hear was my heartbeat. All I could feel was the lightness in my chest. It was over. Or so I thought. Because later that night, back in the safe house, the phone rang again. Block number. Froze. Clara picked it up before I could. She listened. Her eyes narrowed. Then she hung up. "Who was it?" I asked. She hesitated. It was his voice, but different. Lower. Quieter. My breath caught. "It wasn't Jared," she said. "It was a man. Said his name was Ronald. Said he was Jared's uncle." I hadn't even known Jared had any living relatives. Till now. "And Ronald." He ended the call with a promise. "You humiliated blood. That doesn't go unanswered." I couldn't sleep that night. Even though Jared was behind bars, my bones ached with new fear. Different kind. The kind that wears a different face. A face you've never seen but that watches you anyway. Ronald. The name clung to my mind like smoke. I'd never heard it before. Not from Charles, not from Jared, not in any old family photo album. But the way Clara described his voice. Calm, low, deliberate. It chilled me deeper than Jared's screams ever had. Clara handed me a cup of tea the next morning. "You're shaking," she said gently. "I haven't stopped since last night," I whispered. The shelter director, Mrs. Evelyn, acted quickly. The safe house moved me again, this time under state protection. I was given a new name, Mary Ellis, and a temporary ID. They dyed my hair gray blonde, cut it short, gave me thick-framed glasses. It felt absurd, like I was wearing someone else's life. But I wasn't laughing. Ronald knew too much. He'd called directly. That meant he'd bypassed official lines. He had access. Influence. Mara came to visit 2 days later, visibly shaken. "He left a voicemail for me too," she said, showing me the audio. Ronald's voice was eerie, not loud or angry, but slow, steady, and almost polite. "She doesn't belong in that house. It was never hers. Just because Jared couldn't finish the job doesn't mean it ends here." I asked her to play it again, and again. Each time I closed my eyes and tried to imagine his face. Who he was. What he looked like. How deep this ran. Because if Ronald was threatening Mara too, it meant this wasn't about family shame. It was about power. And legacy. Grace called that afternoon with news. "Ronald Walker is Charles's older brother," she said. "Estranged for decades. He has a criminal record, embezzlement in the 80s, fraud in the 90s. But he disappeared in 2004. He's not just off-grid. He's buried." My voice cracked. "So how did he find me?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "Because the property, that house, it's not just sentimental. It's valuable. We just learned there's a $2.3 million development contract sitting on that land. Ronald must have caught wind through Jared. They want it back." Made sense now. This wasn't about me. It was about what I owned. Suddenly, I was more than a nuisance. I was an obstacle. And I knew too much. That night I stayed up, watching the rain hit the window in slow rhythms. Every sound made me flinch. The heater clicking on. The creak of pipes. My own breath. At 3:41 a.m., a car drove past the safe house. Slowly. Then reversed. The lights turned off. I didn't move from my bed, but I pulled the phone to my lap and dialed the emergency number they gave me. It rang twice before an officer answered. I didn't have to say much. They were already tracking the car. By sunrise, they confirmed it was registered to a landscaping business in another state, one with ties to Ronald's name in an old fraud case. That same morning, Grace rushed a protection order through the court. But paperwork couldn't protect me from what I felt in my chest. I was being hunted. By blood I'd never even known existed. The district attorney met with me that afternoon. "We're building a case for conspiracy and organized intimidation," he said. "But we need you to be ready to testify again, this time in front of a grand jury." I said yes before he even finished. Because silence had already nearly killed me once. I wasn't going to let it happen again. Mara moved in with me temporarily under protection. The safe house allowed it, since she was also being threatened. We cooked together, talked late into the night, watched old soap operas and whispered like teenagers again. And one night, she asked me something I hadn't thought about in months. "What are you going to do with the house?" I stared at her. I'd been so focused on escaping, I hadn't even thought about returning. "I don't know," I admitted. "Burn it down. Donate it to the state. Maybe plant 1,000 sunflowers and build a bench that says, 'I survived here.'" She smiled. "Whatever you do, don't give it up." But even in that soft moment, I felt the weight of that house. The wallpaper. The creaking steps. The kitchen where Jared held my wrists so tight it bruised for a week. I wasn't sure if I could ever go back. The next morning we received a letter. No return address. Again. Inside was a grainy photo. Of my first husband's grave. Freshly dug up. With the headstone cracked in half. There was no note. Just the image. Mara dropped it and screamed. I fell to my knees. Ronald wasn't threatening anymore. He was escalating. And he just desecrated the resting place of the man I had once loved with my whole heart. The police called it an act of psychological warfare. But I called it war. And I was done hiding. I turned to Mara that night and said the words I never imagined I would say again. "Take me back to the house." She blinked. "What? I'm not running anymore." "But Margaret." "No. I'm not going back to live there. I'm going back to finish this." I called Grace and the DA the next morning. I told them I would testify. I would name names. I would take the house back, press criminal charges, freeze every account with a Walker name on it. But only if I could do it on that land. They hesitated. Said it wasn't safe. Said we'd need officers stationed on the property 24/7. I didn't care. Because the only way to finish this was to go back to where it all began. Back to the house. Back to the battlefield. The day I returned to the house, the sky was the same color as the porch. Faded gray, like something had drained the world of all its warmth. Didn't feel like home. Felt like a shell. Police cars flanked the driveway. Officers moved through the yard, one stationed by the back door, two more inside. I had a bulletproof vest under my cardigan. It made it hard to breathe. Mara drove. She hadn't said a word in 15 minutes. But when she parked at the curb, she finally asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked at the crooked gutter. The cracked front step Jared never fixed. The broken swing where I used to sit and pretend I was still young. "Yes," I whispered. "I have to." 2 detectives met me at the door, along with Grace. "We've swept the property 3 times, one said. "It's clear for now. But we'll rotate surveillance overnight, just in case." Just in case. Ronald's shadow hung in the air like a storm cloud that refused to break. Inside, the house smelled stale, like secrets and dust. But it was mine. The wallpaper hadn't changed. The faded photos of Charles and I were still hung crooked on the hallway wall. Jared hadn't even bothered to remove them. He just added locks to the bedroom doors. I walked straight to the master bedroom. The door creaked as I opened it. My bed was still made. My old slippers sat at the foot like they'd been waiting for me. But there were signs, faint but telling, that someone had been here. A half-used whiskey bottle on the nightstand. A small photo of Jared and Charles torn in 2. An ashtray full of cigarette butts. Even though Jared didn't smoke. I turned to Grace. "He was living here before the arrest, wasn't he?" She nodded. "For months. Even before Charles passed, Jared had started using this place as his base. Ronald might have been here too at some point." I stood still, absorbing that. Then I whispered, "Get the will." We gathered at the dining room table, the same one where Jared once shoved my dinner plate to the floor and told me I was too dumb to eat real food. Now it held stacks of folders, court notices, and bank statements. Grace laid out the legal documents one by one. "We're filing for full asset protection and transfer of title under emergency circumstances," she said. "We also discovered Ronald created a fake LLC and tried to transfer this house's deed to a shell company overseas." Mara gasped. "What?" "But we froze it just in time," Grace continued. "The house is legally yours again. And we're pressing charges against both of them." Exhaled. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. Until I saw the envelope. It was already on the table when we walked in. None of the officers had seen it before. It was yellowed, old-looking, sealed with red wax. No stamp. No handwriting. Just the weight of a threat. Grace opened it with gloved hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in ink that had bled from years of damp. "What's taken from family must be returned in blood. This house was never yours. He will come." The room fell into dead silence. Mara looked at me, pale. "This was left today." The officers confirmed no one had seen anyone enter or exit. But I knew. Ronald had been inside. Somehow. Some way. And he was watching. Again. They brought in forensics. Searched every inch. Checked the attic, the basement, even the crawl spaces. But Ronald was like smoke. Present, yet impossible to hold. I stayed the night anyway. Because I refused to be scared out of my own home. We set up cameras in every room. Motion sensors. 2 armed officers posted at the front and rear doors. I locked myself in my old bedroom and clutched the Bible Jared once slapped from my hands. It was 2:13 a.m. when I heard the footsteps. Heavy. Measured. Down the hallway. I sat up straight. Reached for the panic button they gave me. The motion sensor in the hall beeped once. Then fell silent. Pressed the button. Officers stormed the corridor in under 30 seconds. I opened the door with shaking hands. Nothing. No one. But the attic latch was open. They pulled down the stairs and climbed up slowly. And there, they found something. A bundle of rags. half-eaten crackers, a burned-out candle, notebook. Ronald had been living in my attic. The officers swept me out of the house immediately. "We're not risking your life," they said. "He's close. Too close." They moved me again, this time into a secure government facility. No one but the DA and Grace knew the address. But I couldn't stop shaking, because in that notebook, he had sketched every room of my house, every officer, every blind spot. He'd even drawn me sleeping. The page was titled, "Soon." The trial for Jared's sentencing was pushed forward. They didn't want to delay. The day of the hearing, Mara held my hand in the courthouse hallway. "We'll get him locked up for good. Then we'll go after Ronald." But when Jared entered the courtroom, flanked by guards, he was smiling, grinning like he'd won. And as he passed me, he muttered something. I couldn't hear it, but I saw his lips move. "And I swear," he said, "he's already inside. He's already inside." Those words played on a loop in my head as Jared passed, his grin stitched into my nightmares. It didn't matter that he was in shackles. It didn't matter that the courtroom was filled with deputies and witnesses. Because what he said wasn't for attention. It wasn't bluff. It was a warning. And I believed him. The hearing was brief. Jared was sentenced to 14 years without parole for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted fraud. He didn't flinch. He barely listened. When the judge read the sentence, he smiled like it was all a game. I didn't clap. I didn't cry. I just stared at the back of his head as he was led away. But even as he vanished through those courtroom doors, I knew it wasn't over. Not with Ronald still out there. That night, the agents moved me to a secure floor in a private facility. I wasn't allowed to tell Mara where I was. Grace could only visit during official hours. Had no phone, no contact, no connection to the outside world. It was safer that way. But it was also lonelier than ever. I began writing letters I'd never send. One to Charles, apologizing for not seeing the monster his son became. One to my first husband, telling him his grave would be restored. And one to Mara, thanking her for giving me back my voice. But the silence inside me grew louder each day. And then a week later came the break in the case. Grace called during her visit with urgency in her eyes. "They found him," she said. "Ronald. He was spotted on a CCTV camera at a gas station near the Louisiana border." My breath hitched. "Is he in custody?" She hesitated. "No. But they found a flash drive in a trash can near the station. It was wrapped in an old sock with your name scribbled on it." I reached for the folder she carried. Inside were screenshots, videos, clips of me walking through the courthouse, of officers entering my house, even of me sitting by the window at the safe house before I was moved. The footage was recent, within the past 3 weeks. He'd been closer than we thought. One clip was the most terrifying. Showed me sleeping. The camera angle was above me, from the ceiling. I covered my mouth in horror. "That wasn't from inside your house," Grace whispered. "That's from one of the shelters. He hacked the security feed." My knees buckled. I sat down before I collapsed. "They've upgraded your protection again," Grace said. "You're being moved tonight." I nodded, numb. But deep down I knew something else had to happen. I couldn't just keep running. Ronald wasn't chasing me for vengeance. He wanted what Jared wanted. He wanted control. The land. The house. The legacy. And if I didn't put an end to it, he'd just keep coming. I told Grace what I needed. "I want to go back to the house." She blinked. "Absolutely not. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I want to go back with a wire. Let him come. Let him show up. We get it all on tape. And we finish this." Grace looked torn. "You're baiting a man who has buried himself for decades and threatened your life. That's not brave, Margaret. That's suicide." But I didn't waver. "Then so be it," I said. 3 nights later, I returned to the house under full tactical surveillance. Officers posed as landscapers across the street. One disguised as a repairman inside the kitchen. Cameras covered every corner. I wore a soft gray cardigan with a wire sewn into the seam. A microphone sat beneath my blouse. And then I waited. Alone. I sat in the same chair I used to cry in when Jared locked me in at night. I brewed a pot of tea and laid out 2 mugs. Like I was expecting company. The night crept in slow. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. And at exactly 1:34 a.m., the motion detector in the hallway blinked red. I didn't move. The officers in my earpiece confirmed. Door opened. Hall movement detected. No facial match yet. And then I heard it. The creak of the 3rd floorboard near the kitchen. I whispered softly. Charles always meant for me to have this house. You know that, don't you? A low voice replied from the darkness. I built it before he ever met you. Ronald stepped into view. Older than I imagined. Maybe late 70s with wiry gray hair and a sunken jaw. But his eyes, they were sharp. Hungry. The kind of eyes that didn't blink when someone begged. You're trespassing, I said calmly. This isn't trespassing, he murmured. This is reclaiming. He moved closer. Understood. You poisoned your brother's mind. And then his son's. Ronald smirked. No. I simply gave them truth. You were always the leech, Margaret. You walked in with soft eyes and hands that had never worked a day. And you wanted the whole kingdom. Charles loved me. Ronald's smile vanished. And that was his greatest mistake. He stepped forward. I didn't move. But I whispered. This house doesn't belong to you. It never did. Wrong, he said, his hand sliding into his coat. It's mine. Officers stormed the room. He didn't resist. But he laughed as they tackled him to the floor. Too late, he said. Even if I rot, someone else will come. You don't erase blood that easily. They dragged him away. His laughter echoed through the hallway. And I stood there, breathing, alive, but shaking, because he wasn't wrong. It wasn't truly over. Not yet. Not until I did what I promised myself. I had to end it once and for all. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. I had to destroy the house. The day I decided to destroy the house, the sky looked exactly as it had the day I first married Charles. Heavy clouds, silver light pushing through, as if the heavens couldn't decide whether to cry or shine. But I had no more tears left. Only fire. Not literal fire. Well, that would have been too easy. Too quick. Too satisfying. I wanted something more final. Something legal. Permanent. Something they, Jared, Ronald, all the shadows that crept in through the cracks, could never take back. I stood on the porch one last time and ran my fingers along the splintered rail. The house had never hurt me. But it had held my pain like a vault. Each floorboard whispered secrets I didn't want to remember. The kitchen held echoes of slammed pans and shaking hands. The walls still knew how to flinch. And yet I stood tall. I had survived the unthinkable. And I was about to reclaim my future. Grace filed the demolition permits. The city fast-tracked them due to the criminal investigation tied to the property. The DA even supported it. It would weaken Ronald's false claim that the land had been stolen from his bloodline. Without the house, there was no emotional leverage. Only cold, hard ground. I've donated the land, I told Grace. To the women's shelter. She blinked. What? They'll build a new transitional home on it. For women like me. For those who need a place when the world says they have nowhere else to go. Mara cried when she heard. You turned your prison into someone else's sanctuary, she said, holding my hand with both of hers. That's more than survival, Margaret. That's grace. The night before the demolition, I walked through the house one last time. Room by room. I left nothing behind. No dishes. No photos. No blankets. I stood in my old bedroom, where Jared used to pound on the door and demand control. And I whispered to the walls. I'm not afraid anymore. The demolition happened at sunrise. I stood across the street with Mara, Grace, and 2 of the officers who'd protected me. We watched the machines roll in. They didn't hesitate. The front door was gone in seconds. The porch splintered. The roof collapsed into itself like a dying memory. And as the dust rose into the morning light, I felt something lift from my chest. I was free. Truly free. A week later, the trial against Ronald began. But I didn't testify. I didn't need to. My story was already written. The evidence was overwhelming, the threats recorded, the notebook from the attic admitted as the centerpiece of the case. He was convicted on multiple charges: stalking, conspiracy, attempted harm, and tampering with government property. He would never see daylight again. Jared tried to appeal his sentence. It was denied. And as for me, I bought a small cottage an hour outside the city. A 1-story home with a white fence and a garden filled with yellow tulips. I painted the walls myself. I adopted an old rescue dog named Penny who loved to nap at my feet. I went to church on Sundays and baked for the neighbors on Tuesdays. And I started writing. Memoir. Not for revenge, but for healing. The title: Silence Isn't Peace. The story I never wanted to tell. It was published by a small press that focused on survivor stories. The first time I held the book in my hands, I cried. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I still had. My voice. Name. My dignity. A few months later, the new shelter opened on the land where the old house once stood. They named it Margaret's Place. I didn't ask for that. But when I saw the sign painted in bold white letters above the door, I finally understood. I hadn't just broken free. I'd built something stronger from the ruins. One night, as I sat on the porch of my new home, watching Penny snore at my feet, I thought about the women who would walk through those shelter doors. The ones still bruised, still silent. I hoped they'd hear my story and realize they didn't have to stay quiet. Not one more day. Because silence protects monsters. But truth sets us free. If this story moved you, reminded you of someone you love, or made you feel stronger, please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, no matter how long you've suffered, no matter how old you are, it's never too late to break free.